students! How are you today? For this session, we will study the techniques in summarizing academic texts. Are you ready? Let's get started. Summarizing is how we take larger selections of text and reduce them to their bare essentials, the gist, the key ideas, the main points that are worth noting and remembering. Here are the 5 techniques in summarizing academic texts, which are presented in keywords. First, somebody wanted but so. Second, SAAC method. Third, 5 W's, 1 H. Fourth, first, then finally. Lastly, give me the gist. Before we study them one by one, let us see first the basic rules in summarizing academic texts. Here's the first rule. First, erase things that don't matter. Delete trivial material that is unnecessary to understanding. Only include information that matters the most. Next, erase things that repeat. Delete redundant material. In note-taking, time and space is precious. If a word or phrase says basically the same thing you have already written down, then don't write it again. Another is trade general terms for specific names. Substitute superordinate terms for lists. For example, flowers for daisies, tulips for roses. Focus on the big picture. Long, technical lists are hard to remember. If one word will give you the meaning, then less is more. Lastly, use your own words to write the summary. Write the summary using your own words, but make sure to retain the main points. Use your own words, but do not include your opinion. Always be objective when summarizing. Are they clear? Great. Now, let's discuss the techniques in summarizing academic texts. The first technique is named somebody but wanted but so. This strategy helps students generalize, recognize cause and effect relationships, and find the main ideas. Let's study the example below. For the somebody, it answers the question, who is the text about? For example, in the story The Little Red Riding Hood, the story revolves around Little Red Riding Hood herself. Wanted, answer the question, what did the main character want? Going back to the example above, in the story of the Little Red Riding Hood, she wanted to give her sick grandmother some cookies. Next is but. It answers the question, what was the problem encountered? In the same text, Little Red Riding Hood encountered a wolf which pretended to be her grandmother. So, answers the question, how was the problem solved? In the story, we knew how Little Red Riding Hood ran for her life. She ran away, crying for help. Lastly, then. This tells how the story ended. Little Red Riding Hood was so lucky that a woodsman heard her and saved her from the wolf. And that's how the story ended. Answer those questions, combine your answers to form an acceptable summary. Here's an example. Little Red Riding Hood wanted to take cookies to her sick grandmother, but she encountered a wolf. He got to her grandmother's house first and pretended to be the old woman. He was going to eat Little Red Riding Hood, but she realized what he was doing and ran away, crying for help. A woodsman heard the girl's cries and saved her from the wolf. Were you able to follow the steps? Perfect. Let's move to the second technique. The second technique is called SAAC method. This method is particularly helpful in summarizing any kind of text. SAAC is an acronym for State, Assign, Action, and Complete. Each word in the acronym refers to a specific element that should be included in the summary. Let us study this table below. The S in the acronym is telling you to state the name of the article, book, or story. For example, we have The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Next in the acronym is Assign. It tells us the name of the author. In the example, the author is Aesop, who is a Greek storyteller. The other A in the acronym is Action. It tells us what the author is going to do in his or her piece of writing. In the example above, the author's purpose is to tell something. Lastly, C for complete. Complete the sentence or summary with keywords and important details. In the example texts, it tells us what happens in The Shepherd Boy Repeatedly Lies to the Villagers About Seeing a Wolf. Now, the next step is to use the SAAC cues to write out a summary of The Boy Who Cried Wolf in a complete sentence. Let me read it for you. The Boy Who Cried Wolf by Aesop is a Greek storyteller, tells what happens when a shepherd boy repeatedly lies to the villagers about seeing a wolf. After a while, they ignore his false cries. Then, when a wolf really does attack, they don't come to help him. Now let's go to the third technique. The third technique in summarizing is 5 W's, 1 H. This technique relies on 6 crucial questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. These questions make it easy to identify the main character, important details, and main idea. Let us use this technique with a familiar fable titled The Tortoise and the Hare. The first W is for the question, who is the story about? In the fable above, it's about the tortoise. The second W is for the question, what did they do? In the story, he raised a quick, boastful hare and won over him. The third W is for the question, when did the action take place? Actually, in the story of the tortoise and the hare, the answer to this question was not clearly specified. Another W is for the question, where did the story happen? The story takes place in an old country road. And the last W is for the question, why did the main character do what he or she did? Going back to the story, the tortoise was so tired of hearing the hare boast about his speed. And for the H, it answers the question, how did the main character do what he or she did? The tortoise kept up with his slow but steady pace. Is the third technique clear for you? Nice. Let's move to the fourth technique. The fourth technique is called first, then, finally. This technique helps students summarize events in chronological order. First, what happened first? To answer this question, you also include the main character and the main event or action in the story. Next is then. What key details took place during the event or the action? And for the finally, what were the results of the action or the event? Let's take an example. Here is an example titled Goldilocks and the Three Bears. First, Goldilocks entered the bears' home while they were gone. Then, she ate their food, sat in their chairs, and slept in their beds. Finally, she woke up to find the bears watching her, so she jumped up and ran away. Is it clear? Now let's go to the fifth technique. The last technique is give me the gist. This type of technique is like giving a friend the gist of a story. In other words, they want a summary, not a retelling of every detail. By just providing the gist, your audience will be able to have an understanding of the text you are telling them without you spoiling the whole story. So students, were you able to follow all the five techniques in summarizing academic texts? Great! And that concludes our lesson for today. See you again in the next lesson. Goodbye!